Frances comes from a generation of women who grew up assuming they were going to have a great, fulfilling career, and then suddenly they're, you know, paying alimony to some guy who decided to drop out and write a screenplay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you all share this? Do you know a lot of people in this situation?
Yes.
Some, and you were saying also we all live a little longer. To be married that long is,
right,
you know, long. Right? So it can be. So I think second acts and third acts are interesting to kind of investigate.
We were saying earlier that you know, it used to be that we would all be dead by the time we were 50. So marriages didn't have to last that many decades.
Right.
Well, speaking of that, one of the things that I think is so interesting about all the characters in the show, you were saying they all started out in a rage, but they're all dealing with a kind of poignant anxiety about being middle-aged and, you know, thinking about the roads.
For what?
Approaching middle age.
What does that mean?
And thinking about the roads not taken. And I was thinking, it made me think of Sally O'Malley, the great character that Molly created for Saturday Night Live years ago, who I'm sure people still ask you to do that on the street all the time. But there's something about that character's jittery desperation that I think fuels a lot of these characters. You look very skeptical.
It's just that's the way my face is.
Resting face.
Skeptical resting face. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think that everyone, you know, you look at Frances and Robert as a cautionary tale. We don't want that to happen to us. But you're all, I mean, do you all feel that you're?
Well, you know, in the pilot episode, Frances says, which to me, like, I hang my hat on this, you know, she says, I want to save my life while I still care about it. And I think it's that looking into the future, how much, you know, what have I left and how to, it's the concern about here I am approaching this point, right, and what has it meant? What has it all added up to? And, you know, I think a lot of us are, you know, we're a generation that sort of, we reap the benefits of the women's movement, and there was actually not a huge amount of discussion in a way. We didn't, no one said, actually, you can't have it all. It was just like, it was right, sort of handed, right? So I think disappointment and ambition, they're trying to make peace with each other. And I think that, you know, we get to talk about it in small ways, and they all have their own feeling. I think everybody, especially as the women have had a chance to speak this season more about those ideas, we've all touched on it. Because it is, whether you articulate it or not, it sits there. It's a part of your waking life. If you're a thinking person and you're kind of in the world, you're like, what else can I manage? You know, what's substance? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. That's.
No, there's a little bit of a sense of each character at some point or another looking at the other characters and saying, I don't want to end up like that.
Right, like you think it's going to be so easy if you just get divorced and you realize maybe it's 10 times harder, or maybe it is easier, or maybe you just don't know. But I think you might have this open path, and maybe you do. But it could also have a lot of sort of barriers to it. I think it's a reality check.
Would you remind me of your character's backstory? You were
I spoke it very fast, but the backstory is, now that you, the backstory is one husband died, and her second husband told her that he was gay, and then he went and got married and had a baby. So she was mad, and she has this child who's about to empty nest. Right. So that's her backstory for the most part.
So you were really the one that the other two women probably didn't want to end up like.
Right.
Although you have a thriving career, which is,
you know, betrayed. You know.
Yeah.
Another thing that's interesting in this show is how it portrays the sort of complexity of women's friendships in such an interesting way. And do you want to talk about that? I mean, you're a funny trio, and you sometimes are in supporting each other, sometimes furious with each other, and the ground shifts a bit.
I think it did shift a bit. I think that in the first season, between the women, I think people were probably very self-involved. I'll speak for my own self, Dallas, and probably weren't as conscious of other people's needs. And I think that's what's interesting about, and very different people. I mean, I think there was always like, would this person hang out with this person? And we were sort of an odd threesome, and I thought that was really interesting. But I think as we move on maybe in our lives, we can be there a little more for each other. Like I said, I think we all met in a certain point in our characters' lives. So I think there's room for that.
And I remember in the pilot thinking, like, I think my character felt so much more emotionally connected to Sarah Jessica's than her own husband. And she's desperate. And I think that people make such a big deal of romances and really making not as big of a deal as friendships, but they should, because friendships are the richness of life, you know, and these girls rely on one another more in the second season, I think, than they did the first season. The first season, I always felt like, oh, my character's such a bad friend because I'm so selfish, so I felt very bad.
I felt that way too.
For Sarah Jessica's character.
I felt that way too.
So, but yeah, just in general, I think people make so much of romance.
And I think too, you know, they're not meeting in college, so they're not forming. You know, certain friendships, I think, at, you know, when you're younger, you're evolving together. You're sort of forming together. You're not entirely baked. And I think when these three characters have a chance to know each other more and differently, we're already very much our people, like we're baked, and so I think too that's tension really exists because we have ideas and principles, and this is the way we see the world, and this is the way we live, and they are in conflict sometimes.
But we were also couples together, which I think I always thought Dallas and Tom, you know, I always thought that was like, oh, you can't be friends with him. Like, we all kind of may have been couples together, and how to navigate that also.
Right.
Changes your friendships with people, sides or whatever. So.
Well, the show would definitely pass the Bechdel test. Does everyone know what that is? Alison Bechdel, the cartoonist who wrote Fun Home.
Yes.
She has this line that she evaluates a book or a movie or a television show by something called the Bechdel test, which has it that the thing has to have at least 2 scenes of women having conversations with each other where they're not just talking about a guy.
Oh,
and it really is
we pass that?
astonishing. You do pass that.
Oh, Lord.
I would say.
Yeah.
You're talking about the crappy art and you're talking about, you know, other things. But it is amazing how many movies and television shows don't pass that.
Most. Not many.
I mean,
most.
yeah, I'd say 99%. You look astonished. You didn't realize you were a part of the vanguard here, did you?
No. There's another benchmark of evaluation of television shows that was enumerated in, I think it was the November 1997 monthly publication of Penthouse Forum, which I've always looked at as the real measuring device of whether a show was going to survive. And ironically, or maybe not ironically, a divorce passes that test. Women like to talk about each other and not about us at all. There you go.